Hello everyone and welcome to Charity Talks. I'm Brooke Dunefsky and today I spoke with Rob Mather, the CEO and founder of the Against Malaria Foundation. While malaria is not a significant problem in first world countries, it's a huge problem in sub-Saharan Africa, where it kills approximately 400,000 people each year and sickens millions more. During my interview with Rob, he discusses why he founded AMF and explains how a simple malaria bed net is so effective in stopping the malaria-infected bugs from harming so many people while they sleep. When you hear how little it costs to save the lives of those exposed to the risk of malaria, I think you'll strongly consider helping AMF further in its mission. So I hope you enjoy the interview. I'm on with Rob Mather, the founder and CEO of the Against Malaria Foundation. Rob, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure.
To start, could you share a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. How far back do we go? Because I'm a little bit older than you, Brooke. I studied chemical engineering at university, so I guess I was a scientist. I then went to work in Italy. I was very keen to learn a language, so I took myself off to Italy and worked for a strategy consulting firm. I then came to the US and I spent 2 years at business school, and then came back to the UK and spent 20 years working in various aspects of business before I set up AMF. So that's a brief background for you.
Yeah. And why and how did you start AMF?
Well, I guess the real reason is because I'm not very good with the remote control of a television. I was trying to turn on or turn off the television, having watched the news one evening, and instead I switched to another channel. And that led me to a program about a small girl called Terry, who was very badly injured in a house fire. In fact, she suffered 90% burns to her body, and the only bit of skin left on her body was the bit beneath a wet nappy, a wet diaper, because it was wet. And this 1-hour program told her story, and I was extremely moved by it. Called a couple of friends and said, would you swim a distance equivalent to the English Channel, which is about 35 kilometers, in a swimming pool, because I'm not brave enough or fit enough to do the real thing on my own. And they said yes, and one thing led to another. And what started as 3 people swimming, trying to raise a few £1,000s for Terry, developed into a swim involving 10,000 people in 75 countries. And we raised a lot of money for Terry, and 100% of it went to her trust fund to assist her in what were going to be very difficult years ahead. So that was back in 2003. And somebody then said to me, what are we doing next year? And I had a throwaway line. I didn't really mean what I then said, which was, well, why don't we try and get 1 million people to swim? And the man on the phone said to me, in a much better Australian accent than I would be able to do, he was Australian. He said, well, that's terrific. That means we only need 999,998 more people because I'm in. And it set me thinking. And subsequently, a year or so, a year and a half later, we launched World Swim Against Malaria. And that was about 15 years ago now. And the Against Malaria Foundation grew from that.
Yeah, it's really crazy to see how something that starts off so small and just more of an idea can really just grow into something that large. So that's really amazing. Most people probably have a general understanding of malaria, but could you discuss more about what it is?
Sure. So malaria is a nasty disease. In fact, it's the malaria parasite that is the thing we have to watch out for. And malaria is transmitted by some species of mosquito, which bite between 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning, which means that what we have on our side, because of that relatively precise window when the malaria-carrying mosquito bites, if we can have people in affected areas sleeping under a bed net, an anti-malarial mosquito net, which these days costs about $2, we can stop the mosquito getting to the person sleeping underneath, because there is both a mechanical barrier, the net, But also these nets are covered in insecticide. They're known as long-lasting insecticidal nets because the insecticide lasts a long time. And even when these nets become ripped and torn and have holes in them, which often occurs in the environments in which they're distributed, because the mosquito doesn't do an aerobatics maneuver through a hole, it lands on the net and migrates to the hole, you have an opportunity to cause the mosquito to pick up the insecticide on its legs, and that causes knockdown, kills it. And so what we can do against these malaria-carrying mosquitoes that are broadly in sub-Saharan Africa, Africa is where 90% of the deaths from malaria occur. What we can do to prevent the deaths and the sickness that's caused by malaria is, amongst other things, and a particularly important thing to do, is distribute these nets. And the scale of the problem is very significant. It's worth us doing something about it because we're talking about something around 400,000 people dying every year. And 70% of those deaths are in children under 5 and also in pregnant women, because in both cases we have immune systems that are developing or somewhat compromised immune systems when women fall pregnant. And that's a human catastrophe. It's a humanitarian issue. And many hundreds of millions of people fall sick with malaria each year. So if we can stop that happening, we can really affect the economies of the countries in which these people live, because if people are sick, they can't teach, they can't farm, they can't drive, they can't function, they can't be productive members of society. So there's both a humanitarian reason why we want to stop people suffering from malaria and an economic reason. So two very good reasons why we want to do something about it.
As the founder of AMF, I'm sure that you've had a lot of personal experiences where you've seen the impact of this work. So could you share a few that have really stuck with you?
There's one in particular, if I may share that with you, and it comes from an experience I had when we were working some years ago in Uganda, and we were funding 50,000 nets for the West Nile region of Uganda, and we were partnering with an organization called the Red Cross, and I happened to be speaking to one of the senior people within the Red Cross in Uganda at the time, who was out in the field, as we call it. So he traveled a number of hundreds of miles from the capital in Uganda, and he was at a local Red Cross center. And he passed the phone to a village leader who was also in the Red Cross office, who happened to be in charge of one of the villages that we were going to be covering with nets, and this man was called Mohammed. And I had a chance conversation with him for a few minutes. And when we prepare for distribution, we gather malaria case rate data and data about the number of households and how many people are in the village. So we have lots of data. And 6 months later, I received an email from an individual at this particular Red Cross center that I found very moving. And Mohammed had walked 6 miles to this Red Cross center about 4 months after the distribution had taken place. So for the first time, his village had every sleeping space covered. And he dictated a message to somebody in the Red Cross center to send to me, and it simply said, "Rob, we don't have malaria in my village anymore, Mohammed." And when we looked at the data, the number of cases of malaria in his village had gone from 387 before, in the months before we had distributed nets, to 7 in one of the months afterwards, and then to 0. And I guess that simple chance conversation with Mohammed underlies, or is an example of why we do what we do at AMF, because we go to sleep at night and a bite from a mosquito would cause an annoying bump, because it's not going to be able to deliver malaria. But in these malarious areas, the bite from a mosquito can literally be, well, it can make you very sick or worse. So I always remember that interaction I had with Mohammed.
Wow, yeah. I definitely feel like it's important also that people just hear about these stories and hear about these experiences. And is there anything that you'd like to really just add or leave us with before we go?
I would simply ask, I hope people have enjoyed this conversation that we've had, and if people are interested in finding out more about what we do at AMF, then please go and have a look at againstmalaria.com and enjoy.